In this exercise, I'm going to show you some really useful alignment tricks here inside of Illustrator. I've saved my progress as outofalignmentshapes.ai, found inside the O5 Shapes folder. And before I fix the alignment of these two shapes so that they are centered on the larger crescents, I'll go ahead and zoom out here so that we can take in more of the illustration at a time. And I wanted to show you how I originally aligned these stars in the first place. Now, when we drew the stars, we made sure to draw them in alignment with the Shapes template. But obviously, I didn't have a Shapes template when I created this artwork, so I was winging it. And you can see that the stars are centered between this top guideline, which represents the top of the outer ellipse, and the bottom guideline, which represents the edge of the inner ellipse. And so I wanted it right in between, so it's smack dab on top of that crescent. Well, what did I do? I went ahead and grabbed the selection tool and I selected those two star shapes. I visited the attributes palette and I gave both of the shapes center points, like so. And then imagine that this is at some other location. So I originally drew the stars, perhaps not this out of whack, but a little bit off center. And then I dragged the center point so it snapped into alignment with the outer circle. And next I dragged it to the top of the inner circle. And just that little movement there tells me everything I need to know. How's that? Well, if I go up to the Object menu and I choose Transform and I choose Move, which has a keyboard shortcut of Control-Shift-M or Command-Shift-M on the Mac, or, by the way, you can also just double-click on the black arrow tool. And notice what you're seeing is your last movement repeated. So it's showing you that you moved the shape downward because we didn't have a horizontal movement in that very last motion, 34.9624 points, as you can see right there. All right, if I was to change that value to negative, like so, and press the Tab key, notice it moves right back up to the top of the outer circle. That's not where we want it. We want it in between. So you just take this value right there, and I'll select point because we don't need the PT. Illustrator knows we're working in points. I'll press /2 like that to divide that value by 2. And notice then I split the difference just like that. And that is such a useful trick if you can get in the habit of using it. And if you're not sure what just happened, well, I'm going to repeat it in just a moment. All right, so I'll click OK in order to accept that positioning. Now I'm going to Control Spacebar drag around this chiclet again. That would be Command Spacebar drag on the Mac. That's a little too close, I think. So I'll zoom out. And I'm going to take this inner shape right there, if I can manage to select it. And part of my problem is I'm still working in this darn Draw Inside mode. So I'll switch to Draw Normal. And I'll click on the inner shape and just move it out of the way. Now let's grab the larger shape. And I'm going to go up to the View menu, and I'm going to switch to the Outline mode. Or press Control-Y, Command-Y on the Mac, because I want to be able to see everything in this illustration as outlined so I can see all the points and so on. And the shapes are getting in my way. I don't want to see that shapes layer right now, so I'll turn it off. And I don't need the guides either, so I'll turn that layer off just momentarily. And I'm going to select this area by dragging across it because I want to see where these points are. And imagine what we want to do is split the difference between this point and this point. These would be the side points in the red crescent. These lower points are the ones in the black crescent that's serving as that little bit of depth in the graphic. All right, so I'm going to grab this center point right there, and I'm going to drag it until it snaps into alignment with where I remember that other anchor point being. That location looks good to me. And then I'm going to drag it down to wherever the anchor point is on this other crescent, and it looks like it's about there. And I'll release as well. And let's just check that I got the right point. Sure enough, these other ones are much lower. So I did snap to these 2 points right there. All right, now I need to split the difference between the two, right? So I'll click on the outline to the rounded rectangle once again. Double click on the black arrow tool to bring up the Move tool. Now it gets harder because it's like, what in the world do I do with this? Especially since it looks like Illustrator is telling us, you just moved that graphic 2,354 points. This graphic isn't even that wide, so obviously that didn't happen. Well, if I click there and press the left arrow key, I can see that we just have quite a bit of accuracy associated with this number. All right, now the easiest thing to do here when you run into this scenario is rather than changing the distance and angle values, for example, I could just change that distance value to negative and divide it by 2. But dealing with the angle value, you would have to take 180 minus this value or something along those lines, and that gets a little dicier. So what I'm going to tell you to do is just change the horizontal and vertical positions. So if they're already negative, make them positive. If they're positive, make them negative, which is what I want in my case. So I'll go ahead and find the beginning of this other number here and change it to negative, press the tab key, and you can see that's it. I moved it back to its previous position. So now what I need to do is go all the way to the end of that number, select the PT and replace it with divided by 2, so /2. And then do the same thing for the vertical value, enter /2 at that location as well. And now this is exactly where I want this rounded rectangle to be. Click OK. If it doesn't make sense, why then don't do it. But if it does make sense, it can come in extremely handy for splitting the difference between a couple of locations here inside of Illustrator. The next thing I might do in order to get this guy aligned properly is I could just drag his center point and snap it into a line with the other center point, and I'm done. That's all there is to it. But what if you don't have a center point to work with and you want to align one object with another and you've spent all this time getting the other object aligned exactly where it needs to be? What do? Well, I'll go ahead and press Control-Z, Command-Z on the Mac. You can align two objects while keeping a key object fixed, and I'll explain how that works in the next exercise.